Don't let him drink that coffee! My son's tiny voice cut through the silence with a clarity that made every head in the room turn toward us at once. The porcelain cup stopped less than an inch from Adrian Moretti's lips. Nobody moved. Nobody even breathed. The grandfather clock in the corner continued its steady ticking while half a dozen men in tailored black suits stared at a 4-year-old boy clutching the hem of my maid's uniform. Adrian's icy blue eyes shifted from the coffee to Ethan, then finally to me. In that suspended moment, I was certain my life had just ended. 20 minutes earlier, nothing about that Tuesday had felt unusual. I had parked my 12-year-old Honda Civic in the employee lot behind the Moretti estate just before 7 in the morning, balancing my travel mug of lukewarm coffee in one hand while Ethan struggled to keep his dinosaur backpack from slipping off his tiny shoulders. His preschool had closed unexpectedly because a water pipe had burst overnight, and after every babysitter I knew had already left for work, I had no choice except to ask my supervisor if my son could quietly stay beside me until noon. I expected to be sent home. Instead, Mrs. Whitmore sighed, adjusted her reading glasses, and reminded me to keep him out of sight. The Moretti estate looked less like a house and more like something built for old European royalty. Marble floors reflected the morning sunlight pouring through towering windows. Crystal chandeliers scattered warm light across polished hallways that smelled faintly of cedar and expensive furniture polish. Every painting seemed priceless. Every vase looked older than my entire family history. I had worked there for almost 8 months, yet I still felt like I was borrowing someone else's life every time I walked through those front doors. Ethan, however, treated the mansion like the world's biggest museum. He whispered questions about every portrait, every staircase, every strange statue standing silently in the corners. His curiosity made even stressful mornings feel lighter. I reminded him, as I always did, that we were guests inside someone else's world. We stayed quiet. We stayed respectful. We stayed invisible. That was how people like us kept jobs that paid enough to cover rent and groceries. Adrian Moretti rarely appeared before noon, at least according to the staff. Some said he traveled constantly. Others claimed he worked through most nights and slept only a few hours. I had seen him exactly twice before that morning. Once crossing the foyer while speaking calmly into his phone, and another time thanking an elderly groundskeeper by name after noticing the man limping. Neither encounter matched the frightening rumors whispered in break rooms across the estate. To me, he simply looked like a man carrying responsibilities heavier than anyone should have to carry alone. Around 8:30, Mrs. Whitmore handed me a silver tray holding fresh coffee, cream, and a neatly folded newspaper. Mr. Moretti had started his morning meeting early. She asked me to deliver everything to the East Library because the regular butler was helping with an unexpected security inspection. My stomach tightened immediately. I had never served Mr. Moretti directly before. I straightened my apron, reminded Ethan to stay close, and carefully carried the tray through the long hallway, never imagining that within the next few moments, my little boy would say 7 simple words that would quietly change every one of our lives forever. My fingers tightened around the silver tray so hard that I thought I might drop it. Ethan stood half hidden behind my leg, his small hand wrapped around the fabric of my apron, completely unaware that every person inside the library was staring at him. Adrian Moretti did not look angry. Somehow, that frightened me even more. He slowly lowered the porcelain cup back onto its saucer without taking a single sip. His expression never changed, but the temperature in the room seemed to fall several degrees. The 6 men seated around the polished walnut conference table exchanged cautious glances, each waiting for someone else to react first. Finally Adrian spoke, his deep voice calm enough to make the silence even heavier. "What made you say that?" Ethan peeked at him for only a second before lowering his eyes to the marble floor. "It smells funny." I blinked in confusion. Coffee smelled like coffee. Fresh roasted beans drifted through the room, mixed with expensive leather and cedar bookshelves. There was nothing unusual that I could detect. I immediately crouched beside my son, my face burning with embarrassment. "I am so sorry, sir. He is only 4. He has a very active imagination. Please forgive the interruption. Ethan tugged gently on my sleeve. Mommy, it does not smell happy. My heart sank. That was how he described things he could not explain. Ever since he was little, he attached emotions to sounds, colors, and smells. Most people smiled politely when they heard him talk that way. I expected everyone here to dismiss him just as quickly. Adrian did not. He kept looking at Ethan for another long moment before shifting his attention toward the man standing nearest the coffee service. Who prepared this? His question was quiet, but everyone responded instantly. A middle-aged house attendant stepped forward, visibly nervous. The kitchen prepared it, sir. I brought it directly from the serving station. Adrian gave one short nod. Replace it. Nobody argued. The attendant carefully removed the untouched cup while another employee hurried toward the hallway. Still, Adrian never took his eyes off my son. What is your name? He asked. Ethan. My little boy answered softly. And how old are you, Ethan? 4. I will be 5 after Christmas. One corner of Adrian's mouth almost formed a smile before disappearing again. Thank you for telling me. I exhaled for what felt like the first time in several minutes. Maybe this would simply become an awkward story everyone forgot by lunchtime. That hope lasted less than 60 seconds. A security officer entered the library carrying a small black case no larger than a lunchbox. He opened it on a side table and carefully tested a single drop from the discarded coffee. I had no idea what he was looking for. The room remained silent except for the faint hum of the air conditioning. Then a tiny indicator on the device flashed bright red. Nobody gasped. Nobody shouted. The silence itself became terrifying. The security officer looked directly at Adrian before speaking in an unusually steady voice. Sir, I recommend that nobody consume anything served this morning until every item has been inspected. Adrian slowly folded his hands together on the table. There was no panic in his face, only calculation. His eyes drifted back toward Ethan, who was now clutching his stuffed dinosaur against his chest. Mrs. Bennet, Adrian said without raising his voice, somehow already knowing my last name. You and your son are not leaving this estate until I understand exactly how he saved my life. My knees felt weak as one of the security officers escorted Ethan and me through a quiet hallway I had only dusted from a distance. The walls were lined with oil paintings of men and women whose serious expressions seemed to follow us with silent judgment. Every polished surface reflected our nervous faces back at me, reminding me how completely out of place we were inside this world. Ethan reached for my hand without saying a word. He could always tell when I was scared, even when I tried my hardest to hide it. We were shown into a small sitting room overlooking the estate gardens. Morning sunlight spilled across cream-colored furniture, making everything appear peaceful enough to convince a stranger that nothing unusual had happened. A woman in her 60s entered carrying a tray with orange juice, bottled water, and fresh blueberry muffins. She smiled kindly at Ethan before placing everything on the coffee table. Mrs. Bennet, I am Eleanor Whitmore. You have worked here for months, but we have never properly met. Her calm voice eased my racing heart just a little. You are not in trouble. Please eat something. I could barely imagine swallowing food. Am I being questioned? She shook her head gently. Mr. Moretti prefers facts before conclusions. That answer somehow made me even more anxious. Ethan climbed onto the sofa, hugging his stuffed dinosaur while swinging his small sneakers above the rug. He reached for a muffin as though this were an ordinary morning. Children had a remarkable ability to find normal in places adults could not. About 15 minutes later, there was a soft knock at the door. Adrian entered alone. Without the conference table, the expensive suit, and the silent audience surrounding him, he somehow appeared younger than I had first thought. Still composed. Still impossible to read. He sat across from us instead of towering over us, folding his hands calmly. Mrs. Bennet, I would like to ask you a few questions. I nodded immediately. Anything. Has your son ever done something like this before? I hesitated. Not exactly. Adrian waited patiently. He never interrupted. Sometimes Ethan notices things other people overlook. He remembers faces after seeing them once. He hears sounds before anyone else does. He describes smells in unusual ways. Doctors have told me children experience the world differently. I have never thought much beyond that. Adrian glanced toward Ethan. And has he ever been wrong? I smiled despite everything. Almost every day. Yesterday he insisted our mail carrier smelled like cinnamon rolls. Ethan looked up proudly. He did. Adrian surprised me by letting out the faintest laugh, so quiet I almost wondered whether I had imagined it. The room suddenly felt less intimidating. Children often notice details adults ignore, he said thoughtfully. Before I could answer, another knock interrupted us. A security officer stepped inside carrying a tablet. He whispered something into Adrian's ear before handing him the device. Adrian's expression remained controlled as he reviewed several video clips. He turned the screen toward me. The footage came from the estate's kitchen cameras. Every second of the coffee's preparation had been recorded. Staff members moved normally between counters, ovens, and serving carts. Then the video paused. A catering employee briefly exchanged trays with another worker before walking out of frame. It lasted less than 3 seconds. I would never have noticed it on my own. Adrian looked back at me. You were exactly where your schedule placed you this entire morning. The cameras confirm it. My shoulders relaxed for the first time since entering the library. So you believe me? He held my gaze steadily. I believe evidence. Before relief could fully settle in, another notification appeared on the tablet. Adrian read it once, then stood slowly. His eyes became distant, calculating again. It seems the employee who handled that tray resigned by email exactly 8 minutes ago. Unfortunately, nobody can find him anywhere on the property. The room felt strangely quieter after Adrian walked out, as though even the air understood something had shifted. I sat on the edge of the cream-colored sofa, watching the gardens beyond the tall windows while my thoughts refused to slow down. 8 months of carefully folding linens, polishing silver, and keeping my head down had taught me one simple lesson. Invisible people survived. The moment anyone important noticed you, life became unpredictable. Ethan seemed completely untouched by that rule. He sat cross-legged on the rug, arranging sugar packets into tiny houses for his dinosaur. Every few seconds he glanced toward the hallway as though expecting someone. "Mommy," he whispered without looking up. "The sad man is worried." I frowned. "Which sad man?" He pointed toward the closed door. "The tall one. Adrian." I almost smiled. If Ethan had called him anything else, I might have corrected him. But somehow, the sad man felt strangely accurate. There had been something behind those calm blue eyes I had not noticed earlier. Not fear. Not anger. Weariness. The kind that settled into a person after carrying responsibility for far too long. Before I could answer, Mrs. Whitmore returned carrying a tablet computer. "Mrs. Bennett, would you mind helping us review something?" I followed her into a nearby security office where several large monitors displayed live camera feeds from across the estate. Men and women spoke quietly into headsets while images switched from kitchens to hallways, gardens, garages, and service entrances. Adrian stood near the center monitor with 2 members of his security team. He acknowledged me with a brief nod before replaying footage from the kitchen. I watched carefully as employees moved between stainless steel counters. Everything appeared ordinary until the recording slowed. The catering employee who had disappeared passed another worker beside a storage shelf. For less than 2 seconds their trays crossed paths. Then they continued walking in opposite directions. Adrian paused the screen. "Most people focused on the coffee. I am interested in everything around it." I leaned closer. Something caught my attention. Not the trays. Not the employees. The cleaning cart behind them. "Can you rewind 3 seconds?" Everyone looked at me. Adrian immediately gestured toward the technician. The footage rolled back. There it was again. A yellow caution sign attached to the side of the cart had fallen onto the floor. Every employee stepped around it except one woman carrying fresh flowers. She stopped, picked it up, smiled politely at the catering employee, and continued toward the hallway. "Why is that important?" one guard asked. I hesitated. "Because I know her. She always arranges flowers in the East Library before meetings. If she arrived after him, the flowers should already have been on the table. They were not when I delivered the coffee." Silence settled across the room. Adrian replayed the footage again, this time following the florist's route through 3 additional cameras. She entered the library nearly 6 minutes later than scheduled. "She was delayed," Adrian murmured. "Which means someone delayed the coffee as well." One of the security officers quickly pulled up another hallway recording. The missing catering employee had briefly stopped outside a supply closet before continuing toward the library. He had not been late by accident. Someone had created those extra minutes on purpose. Adrian looked at me with quiet approval. "Most people only notice what they expect to see. You noticed what did not happen." My cheeks grew warm. Cleaning schedules become second nature when you work in a place like this. Before anyone could say another word, Ethan wandered into the doorway hugging his dinosaur. He stared at one of the security monitors showing the front gate. "Mommy," he said softly, "that truck came back." Every adult in the room turned toward the screen at exactly the same time. Every pair of eyes followed Ethan's finger toward the security monitor mounted on the far wall. A white delivery truck was slowly approaching the front entrance, moving with the casual confidence of someone who belonged there. At first glance it looked identical to dozens of service vehicles that arrived every week with groceries, flowers, cleaning supplies, and maintenance equipment. I would have ignored it completely. Adrian did not. "Freeze that frame," he said quietly. The technician enlarged the image until the company logo filled the screen. One of the security officers frowned. "That delivery was completed before 8 o'clock this morning." Another quickly checked the digital schedule. "There are no afternoon deliveries from this vendor." Adrian folded his arms without taking his eyes off the monitor. "Then why are they back?" Ethan tugged gently on my sleeve. "It is the same truck." I looked down at him. "How do you know that, sweetheart?" He pointed toward the front bumper. "The little bird sticker." We all leaned closer. There it was, barely visible on the lower corner of the bumper. A faded blue bird decal no bigger than a business card. None of the adults had noticed it until Ethan mentioned it. Adrian's expression hardened with quiet concentration. "Open the arrival footage from this morning." Within seconds the earlier recording appeared beside the live camera feed. The technician zoomed in. The same small blue bird sticker sat in exactly the same place. The same truck had indeed returned. "Do not stop them at the gate," Adrian instructed. "Let them believe everything is normal." The security team immediately began speaking into discreet earpieces, their voices calm and measured. Nobody rushed. Nobody raised their voice. Everything about the response reflected preparation rather than panic. I realized then why people described Adrian as powerful. He never allowed urgency to become chaos. Mrs. Whitmore gently rested a hand on my shoulder. "Grace, perhaps you and Ethan should wait upstairs." Before I could answer, Adrian shook his head. "No. If someone has been watching this house, moving them now may attract attention." He turned toward me, his voice noticeably softer than before. "I know this is not the day you expected when you left home this morning. I am sorry." The apology caught me completely off guard. Powerful men in expensive suits were not supposed to apologize to maids. Yet there was nothing forced about it. It sounded genuine. "I just want my son to be safe," I answered honestly. Adrian met my eyes without hesitation. "So do I." For reasons I could not explain, I believed him. A few minutes later another monitor displayed the delivery crew unloading ordinary cardboard boxes near the service entrance. Everything appeared routine. One employee carried cleaning products. Another wheeled kitchen supplies toward the loading dock. Then Ethan quietly stepped closer to the screen. "That man forgot his hat." I blinked. The employee pushing the cart wore a company uniform but no matching cap, unlike every other worker beside him. It seemed like such a tiny detail. Adrian noticed the same thing immediately. Pause. The image froze. The identification badge clipped to the man's shirt hung backward, hiding his photograph. Interesting, Adrian murmured. One of the guards checked the employee roster. Every listed driver was required to wear both a cap and a visible identification badge before entering the property. Adrian looked toward his security chief. Verify every face before anyone unloads another box. As officers quietly repositioned themselves across the estate, I suddenly understood something that made my heartbeat quicken. This was no longer only about a suspicious cup of coffee. Someone had planned every step with extraordinary patience, and somehow my little boy had become the first person to notice that something was wrong. The next hour passed without anyone raising their voice, yet the entire estate seemed to breathe differently. Staff members continued polishing silver, trimming hedges, and arranging flowers as though nothing unusual had happened, but I began noticing details I had overlooked before. Security officers appeared in places that had been empty earlier. A gardener lingered beside the fountain a little longer than necessary. A delivery clerk carefully counted boxes twice before signing a receipt. Everything looked ordinary until you realized every movement was quietly coordinated. Adrian invited Ethan and me into a sunlit breakfast room, overlooking the east lawn while the security team completed their inspection. Fresh pancakes, fruit, and scrambled eggs had been prepared, but my appetite had disappeared hours ago. Ethan, on the other hand, happily accepted a stack of pancakes shaped like bears. He looked across the table at Adrian with complete innocence. Do you always eat alone? The question caught me off guard. Ethan, I whispered, embarrassed. Adrian simply looked down at his untouched plate before answering. Most mornings. Ethan tilted his head. That is sad. For the second time that day, I expected an uncomfortable silence. Instead, Adrian gave a small nod. Sometimes it is. There was something strangely honest about the exchange. No titles. No expensive suits. Just a little boy asking the kind of question adults usually avoided. As Ethan covered one pancake with far too much maple syrup, Adrian reached across the table and quietly slid the napkin holder closer to him before the sticky mess reached the polished wood. It was such an ordinary gesture that I almost missed it. Powerful men in stories often made dramatic entrances. Kindness revealed itself much more quietly. A discreet knock interrupted breakfast. Adrian's security chief entered carrying a folder. Every delivery employee has been identified except one. The man without the cap used a temporary badge that does not belong to anyone on the vendor roster. Adrian did not appear surprised. Did he leave? No, sir. He disappeared before reaching the loading dock. We are reviewing every camera. Ethan looked up from his pancakes. Maybe he changed clothes. The adults exchanged brief smiles. Children imagined all sorts of things. Still, Adrian asked, why do you think that? Ethan shrugged. Because superheroes always change clothes before people know who they are. Adrian leaned back thoughtfully. Sometimes people who are hiding do exactly that. Minutes later, another security officer hurried into the room carrying a folded maintenance uniform sealed inside a clear evidence bag. It had been found inside a janitor's closet only 50 feet from the loading dock. Adrian looked toward Ethan with unmistakable curiosity. Your son has an interesting way of seeing the world. I smiled for the first time all day. He notices patterns. He always has. Adrian studied Ethan quietly as the little boy fed a piece of pancake to his stuffed dinosaur. The world teaches adults to stop paying attention to small things, he said. Perhaps that is our greatest mistake. Before I could answer, Mrs. Whitmore entered carrying my cell phone. Grace, someone has been calling repeatedly. I looked at the screen. 3 missed calls. The number belonged to my apartment building manager. A knot formed in my stomach as I returned the call. His voice sounded unusually tense. Grace, I thought you should know. A man came asking whether you had already left for work this morning. He said he was delivering a package, but when I asked for your apartment number, he walked away without another word. I slowly lowered the phone. Adrian did not need to ask what had been said. One look at my face told him enough. His calm expression became unreadable again. Grace, he said quietly, I no longer believe today was only about me. I think someone expected to find you as well. My first instinct was to grab Ethan, drive home, and pretend none of this had ever happened. That was what ordinary people did when life became too complicated. We walked away. We found somewhere quieter. We hoped trouble would forget our names. But as I looked down at my son sitting beside me, happily coloring on a paper placemat with a box of crayons Mrs. Whitmore had found somewhere, I realized that option no longer existed. Someone had already gone looking for us. Adrian remained silent for several seconds after I ended the call. He stood near the tall windows overlooking the estate, his hands resting lightly in his pockets as sunlight stretched across the hardwood floor. When he finally spoke, his voice carried no fear, only certainty. You and Ethan will not be returning to your apartment today. I immediately shook my head. I appreciate everything you have done, but I cannot impose on you. He turned toward me. Grace, this is no longer about courtesy. His words were calm, never demanding. If someone asked for your address without knowing your apartment number, they were gathering information. That means they expected to find you eventually. I wanted to argue. Instead, I found myself asking the only question that mattered. How long? Adrian answered honestly. Until we understand why. Before I could respond, Ethan wandered over to the enormous bookshelf lining one wall of the breakfast room. Hundreds of leather-bound books stretched from floor to ceiling. He carefully pulled out one with a blue cover, stared at it for a moment, then slid it back into place. Your library is lonely, he announced. Adrian raised one eyebrow. Libraries can be lonely? Ethan nodded seriously. Books are happy when people read them. For the first time that day, I saw Adrian smile without hesitation. It was small and brief, but it softened every sharp line in his face. Then perhaps you can help with that later. The smile disappeared as another member of the security team entered carrying a tablet. Sir, we traced the temporary identification badge. It was printed using equipment stolen from another vendor 6 months ago. Adrian accepted the tablet and reviewed several photographs. Any connection to the missing catering employee? Not yet. Adrian nodded once before looking toward me. Who besides your building manager knows where you live? I thought carefully. My supervisor. My son's preschool. A few neighbors. My sister lives in Oregon, but she has never visited Chicago. Adrian listened without interrupting, as though every detail mattered equally. Has anyone unusual spoken with you recently? I searched my memory. Grocery store. Gas station. Parent pickup. Then one conversation returned so clearly that my stomach tightened. Yesterday afternoon a man stopped me outside the pharmacy. He asked whether I worked at the Moretti estate because he recognized the logo on my housekeeping jacket. Adrian's expression sharpened. What did you tell him? I said yes. Did he ask anything else? I closed my eyes, replaying the moment. He smiled and asked whether the staff entrance was always open before 8 in the morning. I thought he was applying for a job. Silence settled over the room. Adrian slowly looked toward his security chief. The morning delivery arrived at 7:48. Nobody needed to explain the connection. I suddenly understood why guilt felt so heavy in my chest. Without realizing it, I had answered a stranger's harmless question. Ethan reached over and squeezed my hand. It is not your fault, Mommy. His quiet voice broke through my thoughts. Adrian looked at my son, then back at me. No, Grace. It is the fault of people who take advantage of kindness. Just then every phone carried by the security team vibrated at once. The room became perfectly still as Adrian's chief glanced at the message on his screen, lifted his eyes, and spoke only 6 words that made every heartbeat in the room seem louder. Sir, someone just entered Grace's apartment. The words settled over the room like a heavy fog. Nobody reacted with panic. Adrian simply extended his hand toward the security chief, who immediately passed him the tablet displaying a live camera feed from outside my apartment building. I recognized the cracked sidewalk, the flower boxes beneath the front windows, and the faded blue awning over the entrance. It was the place Ethan and I called home, suddenly feeling unfamiliar from hundreds of miles away through a camera lens. Adrian watched the screen for several quiet seconds before asking, "How long ago?" "Less than 3 minutes," the chief replied. "Our people nearby activated the hallway camera after the building manager contacted us." I stared at him. "You already had people there?" Adrian answered without looking away from the screen. "The moment you received that phone call, I decided hope was not an acceptable security plan." Something about that sentence stayed with me. He had not waited for proof. He had acted because protecting people sometimes meant moving before certainty arrived. The camera angle shifted as 2 security specialists entered the apartment building through the front door. Moments later, another feed appeared from the hallway outside my apartment. The door stood slightly open. Furniture remained exactly where I had left it that morning. The tiny framed drawing Ethan had made for Mother's Day still hung beside the kitchen. Calendar. Nothing looked disturbed. One officer carefully stepped inside while another remained in the hallway. They disappeared from view for almost a minute. I held my breath until the radio clipped to the security chief's jacket crackled softly. "Apartment is clear. No occupants. No signs of forced entry." Relief rushed through me so quickly that I nearly sat back down. Then the officer continued. "However, someone searched the bedroom closet and removed nothing. Kitchen drawers are open. Child's bedroom appears untouched." Adrian finally lowered the tablet. "They were looking for information, not valuables." I frowned. "There is nothing important in my apartment." He looked directly at me. "That is precisely why this concerns me." Before I could ask what he meant, another image appeared on the screen. One of the officers held up a small notebook found beneath my kitchen counter. My weekly work schedule. Preschool pickup times. Grocery lists. Utility reminders. Ordinary pieces of an ordinary life. Adrian's expression remained calm. "Whoever entered your apartment left everything behind because they already found what they wanted." My stomach tightened. "My schedule." He nodded once. "They wanted to know your routine." Ethan quietly climbed into my lap and rested his head against my shoulder. "We can stay here," he whispered. "The house feels safe." I hugged him a little tighter, surprised by how badly I needed to hear those words. Adrian walked toward the window overlooking the gardens, where afternoon sunlight reflected across the fountain. "Grace, I have spent years learning how people prepare before they make their next move. They observe habits. They collect patterns. They wait for predictable moments." He turned back toward us. "Today your routine changed because Ethan spoke 7 words no one expected to hear." His eyes drifted toward my son with unmistakable respect. "That single moment forced someone else's plan to change as well." Ethan looked up innocently. "Did I do good?" Adrian crossed the room and knelt until he was looking at Ethan at eye level. The room became completely silent. "You did something very brave," he said gently. "You reminded every adult here that paying attention can save lives." Ethan smiled proudly before offering Adrian his stuffed dinosaur. "He keeps people safe too." Adrian accepted the worn green toy with surprising care, as though it were something priceless instead of a fabric dinosaur missing one button eye. I watched the exchange with a warmth I had not expected to feel. For the first time since that impossible morning began, I no longer saw the city's most powerful man sitting across from us. I saw someone quietly carrying the weight of protecting everyone who had entered his world, including 2 people he had only truly met a few hours earlier. 1 year later, my mornings no longer began with racing across a mansion carrying silver trays. They began with the soft chime above the front door of a little neighborhood coffee shop called Second Sunrise. The sign had been Ethan's idea because, according to him, every difficult day deserved another chance to begin. The shop was small, with brick walls, warm wooden tables, and windows that filled the room with golden morning light. Regular customers knew each other by name. Teachers stopped in before school. Nurses grabbed coffee after night shifts. Retired couples lingered over cinnamon rolls while arguing playfully about crossword puzzles. It was everything I had once believed life could never become. Peaceful. Ordinary. Safe. Ethan was 5 now and proudly insisted on arranging the pastries every Saturday morning, even though his idea of organization involved placing the biggest cookies where children could see them first. Some habits never changed. Every weekday at exactly 8 o'clock, the bell above the door rang once. Adrian Moretti walked in wearing a charcoal overcoat instead of an expensive business suit more often than not. He always chose the same table beside the front window. He never requested special treatment. Never asked for privacy. Most customers assumed he was simply a successful businessman who appreciated quiet mornings. They smiled politely without realizing how many lives had quietly changed because of the man stirring cream into his coffee. The first time he visited after everything had settled, I offered to bring his drink myself. He smiled and shook his head. I think someone else has that responsibility. Right on cue, Ethan hurried over carrying a ceramic mug with both hands, walking carefully exactly as I had once taught him. He placed it gently in front of Adrian before leaning close enough to whisper with complete seriousness. I checked it. Adrian laughed, a real laugh that reached his eyes, before thanking him exactly as though he had received the greatest service in the city. It became their ritual. Every morning. Every cup. Every smile. Months earlier, the investigation had quietly uncovered the people responsible for manipulating delivery schedules, collecting employee routines, and creating opportunities through ordinary conversations. I never learned every detail, and I never asked. Adrian once told me that closure did not always require knowing every answer. Sometimes it simply meant knowing the danger had ended. I believed him. Looking back now, I realized the strangest part of that extraordinary day was never the suspicious coffee or the endless questions that followed. It was how easily one innocent act of attention changed the direction of 3 lives. Ethan had not been trying to become a hero. He had simply trusted what his heart noticed before his mind could explain it. Adrian had not earned my respect because people feared him. He earned it because when uncertainty surrounded us, he chose patience over anger, evidence over assumptions, and protection over pride. As for me, I finally understood that courage rarely announces itself with dramatic speeches or impossible strength. Sometimes courage is showing up for work because your child needs breakfast. Sometimes it is believing a little boy when nobody else does. Sometimes it is accepting help after spending years believing you had to carry every burden alone. One quiet morning, as sunlight spilled across the coffee shop floor and familiar voices filled the room with gentle conversation, Adrian lifted his mug toward Ethan with a grateful smile. Thank you for looking out for me. Ethan grinned and shrugged as though the answer had always been obvious. That is what friends do. Adrian looked at me for a brief moment before nodding almost imperceptibly. I smiled back, realizing that some people could buy almost anything in the world, yet the greatest gift they would ever receive might arrive from the smallest voice in the room. And every time I watched Ethan carefully inspect one more cup of coffee before placing it on that familiar table, I remembered that the strongest lives are not always changed by the loudest moments. Sometimes they are changed by a child who simply pays attention when everyone else forgets to look.